Hey there, John with Crow's Craft, and today I'm going to be making a dollar store D&D miniature. What I'm going to be making is a dragon. I get the requests a lot to make a dragon, but it's not easy to make a full-size dragon out of dollar store supplies and have it look good. So what I've done in the past is I've made baby dragons. I've made a baby dragon turtle, and I've made a copper dragon wyrmling. And today I'm going to be making a green dragon wyrmling. Still a dragon, but much more obtainable to have a decent miniature made out of dollar store supplies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these little Jurassic World dinosaur toy miniatures you can get in any Dollar Tree toy aisle. This one's Indominus Rex. As you can see, he already has a spine, just like the green dragon that I want him to turn into, so I don't have to do a whole lot of modifications to the miniature. But what I do have to modify is the fact that it doesn't have wings. So instead of sculpting them like I did last time, I'm going to scrub the glitter off of these little bats that I found during the Halloween season. And I'm going to chop the little plastic wings off of that, slap them on that little dinosaur miniature, and hope that it looks like a green dragon by the end of it. So let's get started. So I've already scrubbed the bat and gotten all the glitter off. It seemed like whatever glue was holding it on was more affected by the warm water than the soap, so I just used hot water and it took it right off real quick. So now I'm going to cut the wings off the bat and see how big I want them to be. So now that I have the relative size cut out, I'm going to make these look a bit more like dragon wings. Whereas it goes down the complete body of the bat, I really only want this to connect a little bit to the back of the dragon. So I'm going to taper the inner part of the wing, and then I'm going to use my hobby knife to trim off any blemishes or mold lines that I find, just to make this look a little bit better when I hit it with paint. So the last time I made one of these, I rebased it. I pulled the dinosaur off and I made a new base for it. But this time I'm gonna take it a little bit easier and I'm just gonna shave the weird leaf shapes that are printed on the sides of this base just to make it look a little bit more like stone. I'm going to use my hobby knife to just shave the leaf sections off and give it more of a rough exterior that I can hit with paint and make look like stone later on. Alright, and now I'm bringing out the glue gun, and for this I'm just going to use this as the initial glue down of the wings. I really don't want this to be the only glue I'm going to be using. Later on I will reinforce it with a gel super glue to make it stronger, but for now I'm just going to pin this down with hot glue. Hot glue works really well with some things, but I find with plastics like this, you need to use some sort of super glue or even an epoxy to get a good bond between the two. I'm using a gel super glue. You can get this at the dollar store. I'm also going to use this on the wings to give it a little bit more detail. I'll then sprinkle a little bit of baking soda on it to kind of give it more of a bone look on the wings. That way it takes a little bit more detail when I hit it with a paint job, and it just doesn't look like a boring flat wing, because these are cheap toys and believe it or not, they don't have a whole lot of detail. So I'm gonna add a little bit so it makes it easier to paint later on. So now that we added a little bit of dimension with the baking soda and super glue trick, we are going to hit it with a Mod Podge and black paint mix. This is very important when you're doing several different types of textures, especially when I'm adding stuff with the super glue and baking soda. I want it to all kind of blend together, and when I put paint on it, I want it to look like it's all naturally the same model. So putting something like this on it will add a layer of protection and will make all of the surfaces have a similar texture so the paint looks more natural on it. So now I'm going to hit it with a brush on primer. I only have a white brush on primer, so I'm going to mix in a little bit of a black acrylic to make it a light gray so it will cover a little bit better. I have been having a lot of bad luck with spray on primer lately because I live in the Northeast, and as you can imagine, it gets rather cold where I spray paint in my garage, and the paint just doesn't cure the way that I want it to in colder climates, so I just use brush on. Hey, so we're about halfway done. We got this guy completely glued and assembled. I used some super glue to add some detail and texture to the wings, and while I was doing that, the initial joints of the wings that I did with hot glue, I used the super glue and baking soda to kind of just give it a little bit more strength. That way, they don't fall off and they seem pretty strong. I then hit it with a black paint and Mod Podge mix, which definitely started smoothing all the different textures together to make it look a little bit more cohesive. And then I hit it with a primer. I just did like a brush on primer. I've been having not great luck with spray primers, but now that it's primed and completely together, we just gotta make them green. So let's move on to paint. So I have a little bit of a weird idea. I don't usually do my models this way, but I'm going to hit this with the darkest green that I have. Typically what I do is I have a color that I want the model to be, so I base it that color, I hit it with a darker wash, and then I highlight up from there. But here, I'm going to do something a little bit different. We'll get there when we get there, but I'm hitting it with the darkest green that I have, and my plan is to do some kind of different highlighting on the way up. Now that I have the base coat done, I'm going to hit it with a little bit of dry brushing. I'm not going to do any sort of a wash yet or anything like that. I'm just hitting it with a really, really light green dry brushing. I'm using this makeup brush I got from the dollar store. In my opinion, this is one of the best dry brushes I've ever used, even though it's technically not a dry brush. I really like using them, so I suggest to anyone, if you want a cheap dry brush, just go to the dollar store and get a makeup brush. And now here's my weird idea. So I'm using the same color and dry brush, but I watered down the paint a lot. It's still kind of a dry brushing and a wash kind of mix is my idea, but instead of trying to do shadows, I'm trying to use it to do some really easy blending of the dry brushed highlights that I already did and add more highlights after this. So this little experiment I did worked rather well, especially with a solid color model like this where it's just green. If it was several colors, I probably wouldn't do this, but it did blend everything rather well. So now I just have to bring up all the details. I'm going to use a much lighter green and a very small brush to go through and take all of these details that are already there and make them more pronounced. I'm going over the brows and I'm going over the bones on the wings just to give them a bit more depth and detail. Now I'm highlighting a bit more detail onto this. I'm using a smaller brush and an even lighter green to go through and make sure that I have more crisp edging. I'm going to continue to work on the things I was doing before with the brow lines and the protruding bones on the wings, but I'm also going to do a lot with the toes and the fingers and the spine, things that I really need to pop, even the nostrils, something that I want a really light highlight to give it more dimension, to feel like there's more than like one layer of this creature. For the eye color, I'm going to be using a deep peach, kind of orange color. This is going to look really good with the green, it'll really pop. Something else that I'm going to do with this is I'm going to do a little bit of wet blending. I want the center of this eye to be more yellowish. So I'm going to continue the base coat with this orange, and then while it's still wet, I'm going to move on to the next step. And the next step is taking this like orangey yellow, and I'm going to hit the middle of the eye with it while it's still all wet, blend both together so it looks like it gradients towards the middle, and it'll give some really cool highlighted dimension to the eye, so that way it looks like it is yellow in the middle and orange on the outside. So now I'm going to do the pupil. I'm not doing anything too crazy, just doing a slit down the middle. I do want to make sure that it is really small on both the top and the bottom and gets a little bit thicker in the middle. So I did mess up a little bit and I made it very thick, and covering black with colors like orange and yellow being very light is rather difficult, but I was able to do it while the paint was still wet and you could barely tell by the end. With the base, I'm not going too wild. I'm going to be using this blue slate color. I like using a more colorful base for rock just because I feel like it makes it a little bit more interesting to use like a blue or a brick red and then do some shading and highlighting with it than just going with a straight like brown or gray. So now I'm going to be using this bone white to do the spikes and claws. I'm going to hit, of course, the spine and the claws, but I'm not going to be doing the teeth yet because I want to paint the interior of the mouth before I do them. I am going to be doing a few of the more like random spikes that are here and there on this creature. There's some behind the wings and on the tip of the tail. Now I'm going to be painting the interior of the mouth pink. I'm going to start with this as a base coat and I will use some darker tones later on. But for now, I'm just going to be using this like really cotton candy looking pink. I feel like this will look good on the tongue. And after I use the darker tones, I'm going to be able to use this as some nice highlighting afterwards to make the tongue really like pop out against the darker reds I'm going to use. For sake of time, I'm going to be using this maroon contrast paint from Games Workshop. If you don't know what this is, it's essentially a thin paint that is very heavy in colored inks that will do all of the shading for you. I'm going to do the interior of the mouth with this, and then I will do some wet blending highlighting on the tongue with the pink so that way it pops out a little bit more. And after this, I'm going to start on the teeth. With the teeth, I'm going to use the same bone white that I did on the spikes, but I am going to have to be a little bit more precise with this because not every tooth is well sculpted. I have to kind of guess, so I have to do a lot of the shaping with the paint itself, and I am going to have to do some guesswork of where the teeth would go because some of them just get kind of lost in the mold, I think. They're not really well sculpted on here. Now that we've painted up the claws that are like touching the base, I'm comfortable doing a wash on the base now. I'm going to be using a black wash that I made at home. I made this using water, a little bit of black craft paint, and an even smaller amount of dish soap to help it flow. Now I'm going to just lather it in this, let it dry, and I'll move on to highlighting. I've kind of gotten into a comfy rhythm with painting stone. I'll do the base coat, a wash, then I'll do a really, really light dry brushing, like an almost white. Here I'm doing a very light blue, and then I'll go through and do small highlights as well, and I basically call it good after that. Now back to the spikes, teeth, and claws. I need them to look a little bit used, a little bit weathered, because he might be a baby, but he's still hunting, you know? I'm using this sepia wash to just go over each of these. It'll also give a nice, like, kind of dirty used effect to all of them, especially the teeth and claws, so it looks like he's hunted with them before. I'll go back and use the bone white to highlight as a final touch. And voila, I absolutely love this little guy. I think he looks a bit like those little dinosaurs from Jurassic Park that murdered and ate Newman in that Jeep, mostly because as a baby dragon, it looks like he's using his wings to make him look bigger and scarier, especially from the front here. I'm also happy that I didn't have to rebase this guy like I did the last one. I was able to shave off those leaf patterns and make it look like it's stone all the way around. This was a relatively short build too. It only took me a night and I think it came out great. Hey there, we finished up this little dude. I love the way that he came out. These wings really surprised me because when I was scrubbing the glitter off, they weren't really detailed under there. So that's why I had to add detail with the super glue and baking soda. And I think it worked really well. I think they look great. This was 10 times easier than actually sculpting out the wings like I did before. And it feels like these aren't going to break as easy. So I'm going to continue making these little baby dragons. So if you have an idea for a dragon wyrmling that I could make, put it down below. I think maybe I'll do a gem dragon next. I haven't really done anything with gem dragons before. I have a player in my campaign who is a gem dragon dragonborn. So that would be kind of cool to make one of those. So if you have any suggestions, put it down below. I definitely appreciate it, and I appreciate you for watching. If you want to check out my other stuff, I have an Instagram and a TikTok, all the same name, and I have quite a bit of other videos that I've already made on here if you want to look at those too. But I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.